The look on my son-in-law Marcus's face when he realized his boss was bowing to me, it's a memory I'll take to my grave with a smile. He spent 3 years treating me like a senile old laborer who didn't know a spreadsheet from a shovel, convinced that his tailored suits made him a king and my calloused hands made me a peasant. He thought he was the lion of the family, and I was just the dirt under his expensive Italian loafers. But he forgot one very important thing. I'm the one who laid the foundation he's standing on, and when you mess with the foundation, the whole house comes down. To understand how Marcus lost everything in a single evening, you have to understand the man he thought I was and the man I actually am. I started Summit Construction and Development 40 years ago with a single beat-up Ford F-150 and a set of hand tools I'd inherited from my own father. I didn't have a degree in finance or a network of wealthy donors. I had a back that didn't quit and a reputation for doing what I said I'd do. Over 4 decades, I turned that one truck into a fleet of 200 and those hand tools into a development firm that owns a significant chunk of the downtown skyline. I've built hospitals, schools, and the very skyscrapers that men like Marcus work in, but I never felt the need to shout about it. I live in the same brick ranch house I bought in 1985, and I still prefer a pair of steel-toed boots to any designer wingtips. My daughter, Elena, was always my pride and joy. I worked 80-hour weeks so she'd never know the hunger I felt as a kid. I paid for her private schools, her Ivy League tuition, and eventually her lavish wedding. But somewhere along the line, the girl who used to sit on my lap and ask how cranes worked became a woman who was embarrassed by the dust on my jacket. When she met Marcus, a high-level VP at a firm called Sterling Global, things changed. Marcus was polished, arrogant, and looked at my life's work as nothing more than manual labor. The first crock in our relationship happened about 6 months after they got married. We were at a family dinner, and Marcus started talking about his firm's new regional headquarters, a massive 60-story glass tower that was the talk of the city. He was bragging about the prestige of the location. When I mentioned that the soil density in that part of the city was tricky and that the pilings needed to be extra deep, Marcus actually laughed. He didn't just chuckle. He leaned back and looked at Elena with this smirk that made my blood run cold. "Arthur," he said, swirling his wine, "I appreciate the input from the trenches, truly, but this is a multi-billion-dollar project. The architects and developers operate on a level that, well, let's just say it's a bit beyond a residential contractor's pay grade." Elena didn't defend me. She just looked at her plate and whispered, "He's just trying to help, Marcus." That should have been my wake-up call. I should have told them right then that I was the one who signed the checks for that multi-billion-dollar project. But I've always been a patient man. I wanted to see just how far they would go. If that was all, I probably would have let it go. But then came the loan. A year later, Marcus came to me with a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. He needed $250,000 to secure a partnership stake in the new venture. He talked to me like I was a child, explaining the complexities of equity, as if I hadn't been managing a $40 million payroll for years. I gave him the money, not because I believed in his venture, but because Elena asked me to. 2 weeks later, I saw him driving a brand new Porsche 911. When I asked him about the investment, he told me the deal was in progress and that I shouldn't worry my simple head about the details. He started treating me like a personal ATM who was also an embarrassment. At Elena's 30th birthday party, held at a country club I'd helped fund, Marcus told me to wait in the foyer until the important guests had finished their toasts, because my work-worn appearance didn't fit the aesthetic of the room. And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father or their benefactor. They saw me as a bank account with dirty fingernails. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't say a word. I didn't argue. I just smiled, apologized for my aesthetic, and went to sit in my truck. But as I sat there, I started making calls. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I'm the majority shareholder of the holding company that owns Sterling Global's headquarters. I also happen to be the primary silent partner in the very firm Marcus works for. He thought he was climbing a ladder, never realizing I was the one who owned the wall the ladder was leaning against. The escalation hit its peak 3 weeks ago. Sterling Global was hosting its annual Visionary Gala to celebrate the opening of their new headquarters. It was the social event of the year for the city's elite. Marcus and Elena sent me an invitation, but it felt more like a taunt. The card was hand-delivered with a note from Marcus that read, "Please try to find a suit that doesn't smell like a job site. This is a high society event, not a union meeting." On the day of the gala, I spent 12 hours at my newest project, a low-income housing complex I'm building on the south side. I stayed late because we were pouring the foundation, and I liked to be there for the big pours. I was tired, my hands were stained with concrete dust, and my old canvas work jacket had a fresh layer of grime on the sleeves. I looked exactly like the man Marcus despised. I looked at the clock. 7:30 p.m. The gala had started. I could have gone home, showered, and put on the $5,000 tuxedo I keep for board meetings, but I remembered Marcus's note. I remembered him telling me to use the back door of his house so I wouldn't track peasant dust onto his rugs. I decided then and there. They wanted the laborer. They were going to get him. I drove my old work truck, the one with the Summit Construction logo faded on the door, right to the front of the glass tower. The valets looked at me like I was lost, but when I pulled out the VIP parking pass that the building management had issued me months ago, their eyes went wide. I hopped out, adjusted my dusty cap, and walked toward the grand ballroom. The room was a sea of black silk and diamonds. I stood out like a sore thumb. As I walked in, I saw Marcus and Elena standing near a fountain with a group of high-level executives. Marcus was holding a glass of champagne, holding court, looking every bit the corporate prince. Then he saw me. His face turned a shade of purple I didn't know was possible. He excused himself and practically sprinted over, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "I told you to dress appropriately. You look like you just crawled out of a trench. You're embarrassing, Elena. You're embarrassing me." "I came straight from the site, Marcus," I said calmly. "You said the event started at 7. I didn't want to be late." Elena walked over then, her face a mask of mortification. "Dad, please, you can't be here like this. People are staring. Marcus is up for a senior VP promotion tonight. If the CEO sees him with someone looking like this, it could ruin everything." "I'm your father, Elena," I said softly. "Does it matter what I'm wearing?"
In this world? Yes, Marcus snapped. Look at you. You're a disgrace. You're nothing but a glorified ditch digger who got lucky. Now, get out. Use the service exit. I'll tell everyone you were here to check the plumbing. He actually reached out to grab my arm, to physically shove me toward the door, but he stopped mid-motion. The entire room suddenly went quiet. Julian Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global, a man Marcus had been trying to impress for 3 years, was walking toward us. Marcus straightened his tie, wiped the scowl off his face, and put on his best sycophantic grin. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus chirped, stepping in front of me to block the view. "I am so sorry about this. This man was just leaving. He's part of the maintenance crew. I'll make sure he's disciplined for coming through the front." Julian didn't even look at Marcus. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, ignored Marcus's extended hand, and gave me a slow, respectful nod. "Sir," Julian said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "I didn't think you'd make it tonight. I heard you were personally supervising the Southside pour." The color drained from Marcus's face so fast I thought he might faint. "Sir?" he stammered. "Mr. Sterling, you know this man?" Julian turned to Marcus, his expression turning cold. "Know him? Marcus, is this the man who owns our headquarters? Is this the man whose holding company provides 60% of our operating capital? This is Arthur Vance. He doesn't just own the building, Marcus. He practically owns the ground this city is built on." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear Marcus's shallow, panicked breathing. "Arthur," Julian said, looking back at me, "is there a problem here? I overheard something about a service exit." I looked at Marcus. He was shaking. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Elena was white as a sheet, her hand over her mouth, realizing that every luxury she'd enjoyed for the last decade had come from the dirty hands she was now ashamed of. "No problem, Julian," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Marcus was just reminding me about the importance of foundations. He seems to think that because a building is made of glass, it doesn't need the dirt beneath it. I think he's forgotten where he stands." I turned to Marcus. "The $250,000 you invested in that Porsche, that was a loan, Marcus, a loan secured against your personal assets. And since you've been so vocal about my manual labor being beneath you, I think it's time you learned how to build something of your own." I looked at Julian. "Julian, I've been reviewing the partnership stakes. I think Sterling Global needs someone with a bit more perspective, someone who understands that you don't disrespect the person who built the roof over your head." Julian nodded once. "I agree, Arthur. Marcus, see HR on Monday. Actually, don't bother. Your badge will be activated by midnight, and I'd suggest you return that company car by tomorrow morning." Marcus tried to speak,
his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But, Elena, Arthur, please, I didn't know. That's the problem, Marcus, I interrupted. You only respect people when you know they can do something for you. You don't respect the work. You don't respect the man. You only respect the suit. And since you love suits so much, I hope you have a good one for the bankruptcy hearings. I looked at Elena. She had tears in her eyes. Dad, how could you do this? I didn't do this, Elena, I said. You and your husband did. I spent 30 years making sure you never had to get your hands dirty. I guess I did too good a job. You've forgotten that the dirt is what makes the flowers grow.
I didn't stay for the rest of the gala. I didn't need the champagne or the polite applause. I walked back out the front doors, tipped the ballet $20, and climbed into my old truck. The aftermath was quick and clinical. I called in the loan on Marcus's car and his investment. Without his high-paying VP job and with a reputation ruined in the industry, he couldn't make the payments. They had to sell their McMansion and move into a 2-bedroom apartment. Elena reached out a few times, trying to guilt-trip me, but I remained firm. I told her I'd pay for her essentials, but not a dime for Marcus. If he wanted to provide for his wife, he could go find a job. Last I heard, Marcus is working as a junior estimator for a small roofing company. He's wearing a safety vest and spending his days in the sun. He hates it. But maybe, after a few years of actually working for a living, he'll understand what it means to be a man. As for me, I'm still at the job sites. I'm 70 now, but I still like the smell of fresh sawdust and the sound of a diesel engine in the morning. My grandson, Alina's boy, comes to visit me on the weekends. I bought him his first pair of miniature work boots last week. We sat on the tailgate of my truck, eating sandwiches and watching the cranes move over the city. He looked at my hands, stained with grease and scarred from 40 years of labor, and he didn't turn away. He touched a callus on my palm and asked, "Did you build all this, Grandpa?" I looked out at the skyline, at the towers of glass and steel that I'd raised from the mud. I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. "I did, kiddo," I said, ruffling his hair. "But remember, it doesn't matter how high you build, as long as you never forget who helped you dig the hole." He nodded, leaning against my dusty shoulder. Marcus doesn't call me anymore, and that's just fine. My grandson calls every Sunday to ask when we're going back to the site. Funny how that works.